Now I'd like to introduce our co-chair and longtime board member and inspiration to all of us, Ann Rogers.
Thank you. A couple of words before I introduce our speaker. I was out at Greenspire School this morning and saw a lot of other younger children who are doing wonderful things and learning and are committed to changing the world. Some of the questions they had were amazing. These were, 5th, 6th, 7th graders. I want to remind these young people and the ones that are here that a lot of us who have been around a long time are here to help. And please take advantage of some of this because there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and background and experience in this community. And we're available to you anytime. So just don't hesitate to help. We're all in this together. It's my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, and I'd love to have her come up. Liz, where are you? I'm not going to read all that's in the booklet to you. You're perfectly capable of reading that yourself. And you can read all of her wonderful credentials. But the thing about Liz that has inspired all of us is her dedication, her energy that's infectious, and her continued bringing in more people to work on all of these wonderful things that need to be done, and in particular, the getting rid of the pipeline 5 under the Straits. Liz has been an inspiration for me and for so many other people in this community. And I think that oil and water don't mix with its spreading tentacles of effort and cooperation is doing something for this state that hasn't been done before. So she's got the message to tell you. Please get involved in it. Pick up signs, contribute, do whatever you can to help move this forward. I'm very, very pleased to introduce Liz Kirkwood.
Wow. Ann just leaves you speechless. I'm so incredibly privileged and honored to be here. This is, to be in a crowd with such inspiring people is, what everybody dreams about. So thank you for the privilege and honor to be up here. Well, first of all, happy Earth Day. It's fantastic. And I just wanted to note that today marked a landmark agreement where we had 160 countries, including the United States, signing the Paris Agreement on climate change. So we should give a hand for that. So for this year's topic, Greg Reisick and Ann Rogers asked me to talk to you about Line 5. And I said, are you sure? Because, a lot of people in this room will know about this issue. They said, yes, we're sure. And that's because this is potentially one of the greatest threats facing our Great Lakes. 2 63-year-old oil pipelines located in the middle of the heart of the Great Lakes. Next. But before I get started, this story and this incredible campaign of the Oil and Water Don't Mix, I first want to tell you the story about flow and our perspective and why this is a very heartfelt matter to us. And it all starts with Jim Olson right there. And I don't know if you've seen this picture before, but I love this one. And Jim is really one of my heroes, and because of his just extraordinary passion and vision to protect the Great Lakes. So following 9 years of Nestle's litigation, just want to give you a little background about Flow. Jim and many of the representatives citizens he represented saw that there was an urgent need to address the systemic threats in the Great Lakes. This is an incredibly, an extraordinary ecosystem, as Bill Hansen has described. 20% of the world's fresh surface water, over 8 Great Lakes states, 2 Canadian provinces, and what is it that keeps us together? It is the water, and yet there's so many environmental laws overlapping. What could be that unifying approach? Next. Just mentioning a couple of the systemic threats, everything from algal blooms shutting down Toledo's water supply to the Asian carp, basically knocking on our door from the Mississippi River, so on and so forth. And so a lot of the environmental laws of the 60s and 70s, they've been incredibly powerful at cleaning up our rivers, but we still see so many tremendous problems. And what Jim and others saw, that there was this need to apply a principle that could be enduring and be time-tested through politics. And that was this shared notion called the Commons and the law of public trust doctrine. And so, here we are. And so Flow is a science-based law and policy center based here in Traverse City. And we operate as this laboratory to apply public trust doctrine and law and science to the threats that we're seeing in the Great Lakes. And as we look at the problems in the region, we always ask ourselves, how can we empower the 40 million people who live in this region to hold the governments accountable and protect and preserve our waters for current and future generations? So next, please. So let's talk about Line 5. This is a really extraordinary story that I think when most of you first heard about that there were oil pipelines in the middle of the Great Lakes, you kind of said, what? What's this? Just the double take. And I remember the first time I found out about that. This controversy is truly the defining public trust issue of our time. And I say that because the state has never enforced the terms of an easement agreement to safeguard the lakes. In fact, the state pretty much just forgot about their duty and their perpetual duty to evaluate the impacts of the ecosystem from a potential oil spill. And it is really an ideal example of how citizens can educate both state and provincial governments to exercise their duty and uphold their responsibility to protect our common waters. And so this is an example of exactly why our organization exists. Next. So you may remember 6 years ago in Kalamazoo, the Enbridge Line 6B line ruptured, and it spilled over 1 million gallons of heavy tar sands oil, excuse me. It took Enbridge 17 hours to respond, and it cost Enbridge $1.2 billion to clean up. The National Transportation Safety Board called them the Keystone Cops. So just to give you a background about pipelines, about 70% of all pipeline failures in this country occur because of corrosion, because of failures of the material from welding problems and other materials of the pipeline, and also operations. And that was the exact case here in Kalamazoo. So, and here's a picture of a guy wading through the tar sands. I mean, this is viscous, heavy stuff. It's like peanut butter coating the bottom of the river. Next, please. So following the Kalamazoo disaster, people started getting out the maps. They wanted to know where all these pipelines were. And this doesn't even begin to show all of the crisscrossing lines of our natural gas lines and others, but these are the pipeline veins and network of Enbridge. And they're the largest pipeline oil company in the world. What was remarkable about Line 5, which is a 645-mile pipeline spanning from Superior, Wisconsin, across the UP, across the 5 miles in the Straits of Mackinac, down the lower peninsula and back to Canada, was that the state of Michigan granted a special easement, a public trust easement to Enbridge, known as Lakehead Pipeline Company in 1953. In other words, this pipeline could not have been built except for the express permission that the state of Michigan granted Enbridge. That's very significant because most pipelines are primarily regulated and governed just by the federal government. And this is a legal contract between Enbridge and the state of Michigan and is revocable if our public waters are put at risk. So in just a matter of a couple of years, this issue of Line 5 has just come out of obscurity, and it's really become a top environmental issue here in the state of Michigan and also in the region. And as you can see, this is from the north view looking down south. These pipelines, these twin pipelines, are about a mile and a quarter just to the west of the Mackinac Straits. But it's really out of sight, out of mind, right? We didn't know they were there, but now we do. And Jim and I started looking at this issue. We thought there was something very terribly wrong, but also something very unique and special about these pipelines. And Flo's role early on was defining who had legal authority, who could be the responsible people to decommission these pipelines. And so we provided that role in the campaign. We've been that legal lens, and we have also teamed up with this extraordinary group of scientists and engineers who have put together an extraordinary, compelling argument to show the state that this pipeline has to go. So next, please. So let's dive deeper. Okay, that was a really lame attempt at some humor, right? So National Wildlife Federation and a woman by the name of Beth Wallace was, who I'm going to be speaking with in Ann Arbor on Monday. She worked for, she lived in Kalamazoo area, and she did some preliminary research, and she and another gentleman, Jeff Alexander, authored a report called Sunken Hazard, and they really put this issue on the map. National Wildlife Federation also went down and they had these divers, and as you can see, this is just one of the pipelines. It's encrusted with mussels, invasive mussels, that entered into the Great Lakes once the St. Lawrence Seaway was open in 1959. So in other words, the additional weight of the mussels was never contemplated by the engineers at that moment when it was designed. And so these are not actually broken supports, but there were supposed to be wooden slats that would go around the entire circumference of these pipelines because of the very powerful and hostile environment to prevent erosion of the pipeline. Next, please. So out of all of this was born the Oil and Water Don't Mix campaign. And I thought it would be really appropriate if anybody who is a partner here, if you could just stand up to see how many people are involved in this effort, because it's really, really amazing. And so, as you can see, this, Flow is just one of many of the partners, and I'm honored and privileged to work with you all every day. And what is extra cool about this is a Northern Michigan-led campaign, and it really is awesome. Okay, June, you want to give a clap to everybody? So in just a couple of short years, Oil and Water Don't Mix has expanded to 26 different groups. I mean, we are seriously grassroots. We have, but we also have national groups like Sierra Club and Food and Water Watch and others. I'm not going to mention everybody because otherwise I'll be listing 26 groups. But this campaign has raised the stakes in a huge way. We've put this issue on the map, raised awareness for citizen action, and as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, businesses all around the state are joining. This is a critical component. We have lots of citizen action and demanding the state to shut this pipeline down for the flow of oil. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that we have recent incredible momentum where we have over 30 communities that have passed local resolutions, including your very own Traverse City. Thank you to Mayor Carruthers. So, it's so hard to summarize up this issue that we've been working on for so many years. But one of the major milestones that happened as a result of our work at Flow and also Oil, Water, Don't Mix, at Flow, we authored a critical report looking at the imminent harm and this unacceptable risk that these pipelines would pose from both a legal and a scientific engineering perspective. And we concluded that the only way to eliminate this risk was for the state to evaluate both the alternatives and the risk. And what was amazing is that the state of Michigan listened to us, and these are their 4 recommendations. And you can see that the state recommended to do a risk analysis and an alternatives analysis, and also demanded greater transparency. This is a company that's withheld information, and it's incredibly difficult to find out what is the health of these pipelines. Are they safe? Next. Just one other thing I should mention. This is amazing. Just last July, that was the first time that the state of Michigan even acknowledged that they had jurisdiction over the issue. They continued to punt ownership and deflect it. And the last thing I want to say about that report is, while it was very well intentioned, it was very it lacked because it didn't have a timeline for any action. So marching on, we had University of Michigan conducting studies, identifying that this would be the worst possible place for an oil spill given these extraordinary currents, the volume of water moving between these hydrologically connected waters is 10 times that of Niagara Falls. The risk is further accentuated by the fact that there is a total inadequate emergency response. The U.S. Coast Guard, which is the primary responders, they've testified before Congress that they're uncomfortable with cleanup. Imagine 8 feet of ice. What are you going to do? The Coast Guard won't go out if there are waves that are 3 to 4 feet. The Coast Guard won't go out when it's dark. So you can imagine, not good. Moving on. So last year, we also, with our team of experts at Flow, we put out a report to look at the alternatives. We wanted to engage this conversation in a very dramatic way. Enbridge kept on saying, well, you know what's going to happen if we don't have this pipeline? It's going to come by rail, by barge, by truck. And we said, how about using your existing pipelines that go around the Great Lakes, not through them? And as you can see, it's a very, very extensive network. One thing to remember, while the Keystone XL fight has been going on and was finally defeated last November, where President Obama denied the presidential permit, Enbridge has been very strategic, expanding segment by segment their pipeline network. And what you have here is a Keystone pipeline that surrounds the Great Lakes. Enbridge also took the opportunity after the Line 6B disaster in 2010, and they doubled the capacity on Line 6B. So imagine, this is the company that's caused the worst inland US oil spill in history, and then we gave them an opportunity to double the capacity. Next. Oh, sorry, go back one more thing. So in this report, we indicated that there were alternatives around the Great Lakes. We discovered that only 5 to 10% of the oil from Line 5 actually is used by Michigan and Ohio refineries. We also made this very clear that the 85% of the natural gas liquids going to the Upper Peninsula would remain going to the Upper Peninsula, because what we are focused on is the oil. And finally, we concluded that decommissioning Line 5 was not only possible, but it would be the best option because it would eliminate the high risk. Okay, next, please. So we've heard from Attorney General Bill Schuette that this pipeline would never be built and that its days are numbered. These are very, very encouraging and hopeful words. And yet, still, we have not seen any action. It's been 282 days since he said those words. I actually counted them today. And what is the real problem is that he's working on a political time frame. There is no urgency, and you can't have a political time frame when you're dealing with an ecological crisis of this magnitude. I'm just going to pause for 1 second because I came across this quote from Governor Bill Milliken. It was really very touching. And I thought it was very appropriate. He said, "The simple truth is that Michigan has always been and will always be a quality of life state. The quality of human life in Michigan depends on nature. The natural beauty of Michigan is much more than a source of pleasure and recreation. It shapes our values, molds our attitudes, feeds our spirits." And that's what's at stake here. So I want to wrap this up by giving you some exciting information about the recent developments in the past month on this campaign. It has been extraordinary, hence the moving the needle here. So we'll move to the next slide, please. So just last month, the University of Michigan, funded by National Wildlife Federation, conducted their second huge study. They simulated 840 different oil simulations, and they concluded that a 1 million gallon oil spill, which is the same amount in Kalamazoo, remember, approximately, that could potentially impact over 700 miles of coastline in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. And over 60% of the open water in Lake Huron would be affected. You can see a tremendous impact into Canada. And then in Lake Michigan, a little bit less, 15% of the open water. But it would be coming down this way, not towards the Leelanau Peninsula. It's a vast, vast area that is mind-boggling. Next, please. We are seeing we're breaking down the barriers between the parties. We are seeing this issue is resonating as a Great Lakes issue. Senator Jones from Grand Ledge, who's a Republican, just recently introduced legislation that would regulate existing pipelines like Line 5 that would require third-party independent risk and alternatives analyses. And if they failed those analyses, the oil would be terminated. This is a huge deal. We've also seen Senator Peters and Stabenow at the U.S. level passing legislation, the Safe Pipes Act, that would and this has passed, that the Great Lakes is now considered a high consequence area. So it's wonderful to see this, and we're picking up momentum. Next, please. And just last week, Flo authored a sign-on letter where we had 22 of our oil and water don't mix partners and Patagonia calling on the state's top leaders to terminate the easement agreement with Enbridge based on 8 known easement violations. And these violations compromise, most of them are related to the structural integrity and the design of the pipelines themselves. So what does that mean? In the campaign, we see this as a pivot point where all of a sudden, we're saying that Enbridge is operating illegally. And I'll briefly talk about that. And it's shifting the burden on the state of Michigan so that they can no longer delay and say, we're going to wait till the summer of 2017 when a risk analysis comes out and an alternatives analysis comes out. We can't wait that long. This is a company operating illegally, and they must take affirmative action to ensure the compliance and enforcement of this agreement. So let me just briefly summarize some of these violations. 4 of the violations that we identify deal with the structural integrity, with the wall thickness. Enbridge recently, as I mentioned, the disclosure's been a huge problem. They're not telling us what's going on, but we just recently found out that part of the onshore portion of this 5-mile stretch has corroded by 26%. We don't know how much is corroded underneath those pipelines, but just that alone is a violation. Secondly, there are issues related to the curvature of the pipeline, so it cannot be bent over a maximum amount otherwise because of the brittle nature of, because of compromising the pipeline itself. The wooden slats that we talked about before, and also half of the pipelines don't have any supports on the bottom lands and are subject to washouts from the currents. I should also mention the insurance requirement. We still don't have a worst case scenario. Enbridge is saying that it would be $700 million. We don't think that that's credible given the fact that Kalamazoo was $1.2 billion. And finally, just to wrap this up, Enbridge is violating the requirement to have a properly approved federal oil spill response plan, which violates both federal law and then also triggers state violations, including the Michigan Environmental Protection Act. And what this all amounts to is that Enbridge is, under the agreement, is supposed to act as a reasonably prudent person. And that's a legal standard that says you have to avoid risk. And all of these violations simply don't add up to what a reasonably prudent person would do. So we'll move on. So what's it going to take? How are we going to win? So I think the theory of winning is complex. I think it is multi-pronged, and I think it's moving on all fronts. And the first thing is that the political pressure of this campaign is so critical. Your involvement and your voice really, really matters. The legislative voices, they matter too. We also have, we need political courage from this state that has, as we know, we're living in a culture of inaction and delay with the Flint crisis that is just such an extraordinary tragedy. We hope that that will change the culture in Michigan, and this, because this issue is the next, great infrastructure disaster waiting to happen. Legal action. The state of Michigan needs to enforce this easement. If they don't, citizens need to step up and bring accountability. And finally, this issue really requires us to think about larger issues about the way that we live. The relationship between water and food and energy and what kind of future we want for our children. And Dan's work that you mentioned about solar, solar being in this community is just thrilling and exciting, and we all need to be part of this new solution, this new economy. Next, please. So many of you came this week on Monday, and we had almost 400 people come. This is part of a 5-city tour. And I was just thinking today that I've spoken to 1,000 people in the past week about this issue. It's awesome. And I will be down in Ann Arbor on Monday, and the beat goes on. We've gotten an incredible response from this film. This is a fun film. This is not all about, sometimes we're all kind of serious and everything, and this is great. This is about 2 guys who are adventuring across the line 5 in the Upper Peninsula, and they're meeting people, and they're enjoying and celebrating the beauty of our earth and the beauty of this place here in Michigan. So I know people we will be bringing this back to other communities throughout Michigan, and you can add your name if you'd like to host it. Next. So, okay, we have to have some activism here, right? Because that's what we're all about. So I know a lot of you have already signed these petition postcards, and I have them on the back table there, and the petition asks the governor and state leaders to take action under the easement, enforce it, and terminate it. So you can either text it or you can sign the petition, and we have all the boxes back there. Peggy's back there holding it there. So that's something you can do. All right, and next, please. And a couple of other things. We've mentioned the yard signs. We've already sold 100. We're trying to go for at least 500. So if you could get your yard sign, that would be awesome. Writing letters to the editor, passing more resolutions, becoming business supporter. Donating always helps. We are fighting the largest pipeline operator in the world with untold and limitless funds. And I've mentioned all of the other things. Last slide, please. And I think Margaret Mead she just kind of always sums it up, because never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that's because of you. Thank you.